Earlier today, I had an interesting conversation with comic book writer Aaron Sparrow. We talked about how Tim Sheridan from DC Comics essentially not listening to the criticism and feedback from the actual customers and was kind of twisting their words and essentially learning nothing from the failure of Teen Titans Academy. There was another book that was more roundly criticized than Teen Titans Academy. It was called I Am Not Starfire from Mariko Tamaki. Some of you may know her as the Detective Comics writer there for a spell, did that 12-issue weekly event series that was absolutely just terrible. Pretty much ended Mariko Tamaki's time on Detective Comics, and not a second too soon. It's a good thing she moved on. Mariko Tamaki, not normally a very good superhero comic book writer. Quite frankly, she's from the YA scene. In the past, has done a lot of queer kind of coming-of-age stories, which is what I Am Not Starfire, I guess, was supposed to be. And there's an article from CBR called Fans Rejected Starfire's Daughter, but She Deserves Another Look. Here's Why. And this is yet another example. This isn't just Mariko Tamaki not learning from the criticism and not listening to the criticism. This is obviously the comic book media not listening to the criticism and not understanding why this character was rejected. Thankfully, they actually acknowledged that the character was rejected by readers. To be quite frank with you, this was the wrong story at the wrong time with absolutely the wrong cover. It was very memeable. I saw lots of the fat guy from Aqua Teen Hunger Force being placed over Mandy on the cover because their body types are so similar. It was absolutely hilarious. Let's listen to what CBR thinks about Mandy and why we should give the character another chance and have a critical look at why they're not understanding the actual feedback. DC Comics is no stranger to controversy. Fans have frequently voiced their disapproval of new characters introduced or more socially progressive stories, such as that of John Kent. One of the most prominent examples recently is Mandy Anders, the alternate universe daughter of the Teen Titans Corey Anders, aka Starfire, an overweight teenage girl with skin problems going through a goth phase, fully opposing her mother by her own account. In one of her first pages of her introductory comic, she says that she can be defined as the polar opposite of her bikini-wearing, super tall sex symbol mother. For fans who grew up with Starfire's body on constant display as the object of Dick Grayson's affection, Mandy's physical features were dissatisfying, to say the least. Well, they got that part right. There's no denying that the way the character looks, Mandy looks on the cover, is one of the reasons they got a lot of feedback, because at this point, or at least that point, and right now I think it's even worse, people are just fed up. They're fed up with this current crop, this current generation of comic book writers that essentially seem to hate everything that comic books have stood for the past 80 years. In the past, when you introduce new legacy characters or maybe daughters and sons of existing characters, obviously they would need to be different than their parents, but there would be some type of physical characteristics that would be similar, and they would kind of have to prove themselves. But the writers never went out of their way to make the character wholly unlikable and make the design of the character wholly laughable when you look at it. To a lot of comic book readers, longtime comic book readers, and I'm talking about comic book heads, I'm not talking about little kids that this thing is actually aimed at as far as that market, books like I Am Not Starfire are a slap in the face to 80 years of history and tradition of a wonderful comic book industry that appears to be eroding before our very eyes because the current crop of creators are just terrible. Not to mention that the character herself is wholly unlikable in the story. I'm not going to go through the entire story here because I've already reviewed it. But the biggest problem with the story is Mandy herself. She is a terrible person. She hates her mother for no other reason than her mother is a hero and she doesn't look like her. She hates her friends. She hates the pretty girl that tries to befriend her and treats her like crap. And she treats everyone badly. And in the end, there is a little bit of redemption for the character, and she does come around and somewhat save the day, but she never acknowledges that she was wrong about her mother or her friends, never apologizes for anything. She's just entitled to be a complete a-hole to everybody, and that is an enormous turnoff within the story. But the article continues. Mandy was first introduced in I Am Not Starfire by Mariko Tamaki and Yoshi Yoshitani. The comic is a brilliant and beautiful exploration of two primary things. Firstly, in the vein of Encanto and Turning Red, I Am Not Starfire is largely about generational trauma and the difficulties of navigating exactly what it means to escape the expectation of progenitors in favor of living an independent life. Second, the book gives a realistic depiction of what it's like to be a teenage girl in high school who is awkward antagonistic, and gay. This is a character based in a superhero universe. Nobody reading this book is looking for like a realistic interpretation of what it's like to be goth and gay in high school. This is set in the DC Comics universe. It's not a real universe. In this universe, there's a man can fly and he's faster than bullets and he could, fly all the way to the sun and stuff like that. Her mom's an alien. These things are wonderfully outrageous and insane and could never exist in this universe. And I think that's another reason that people are turned off to this current crop of writers. They're not embracing the genre which they are creating in. There is an entire genre sitting in bookstores for YA coming of age, queer coming of age graphic novels that are very realistic. But these are goddamn superheroes. We need to treat the universes like they are superhero universes. Generational trauma. What kind of mumbo jumbo made up bullshit is that? We all have parents. They all have expectations. They're all good at something, and we all have to find our own way in the world. That doesn't mean you have to hate your parent because they were successful or a celebrity of some type. I imagine those types of situations would be difficult for a kid. It's certainly different than what I experienced as a child, but acting like generational trauma entitles this character to be such an overwhelming jerkwad to her parents and her friends is just laughable. Nobody wants to give a book like that to their kids with that kind of example. You want characters that maybe look up to their parents and respect them and maybe teach some type of good values in there. And you could have those moments at the beginning that I just pointed out where she's such an a-hole to everybody. But then if she learned her lesson, and you know what? My mom Starfire is not so bad. She was a hero. Look at what she's done. But she never comes to that conclusion. Everyone just bends their will around this character because she's such an overwhelming, awkward dickhead. And apparently in Mariko Tamaki's mind, she's entitled to just be able to treat everyone poorly anytime she wants. Nobody wants her kids rating crap like that. And you can see by the sales. Shockingly, I Am Not Starfire didn't really sell well. Go look at the Amazon charts. Go look at DC sales. This is not a successful YA graphic novel. And a lot of DC Comics YA graphic novel fare has not been successful because they've gone out there and they've hired writers like Mariko Tamaki who likely took this story, already had it written. DC paid her money and she just adapted it into a DC story because it's not a superhero comic. It's not of the genre that is portraying on the cover. Now, there is something out there that is obviously the elephant in the room. And we'll talk about that after this last portion of the article itself. This is what CBR said. This second point appeared to be a major area of difficulty for many readers who fondly recall the alternate reality daughter Starfire and Nightwing had previously Mari Grayson. However, these two characters were created for very different purposes. Mandy was intended to be a realistic presentation of an awkward teenage girl, while Mary was created as a superpowered eye candy, much like Starfire herself. The intent of these were to say that Starfire's daughter is inordinately unattractive, chunky, and awkward. The issue being that this was the entire point of her character in the book. Unlike what has been predominantly seen in the Teen Titans comics, teenagers are not generally flawless beauties. In reality, insecurities abound, and they often struggle with feeling powerless. Honestly, I think every person in this world pretty much can understand the feeling of being an ugly duckling. When you're a teenager, you're not fully formed. It's kind of awkward. You go through hormone changes and stuff like that. Shockingly, you look at me now and you're like, Wes, you're a beautiful man. And yes, I am. It wasn't always this way. I was a teenager once, and I wasn't quite as attractive as I am now that I'm a fully formed human adult. But that wasn't the criticism regarding the look of the character. Yes, the character is chunky and awkward and all this stuff. The real problem is Mandy is a self-insert character from Mariko Tamaki. The character looks almost identical to Mariko Tamaki, and that turns people off. When you look at the cover, it's laughable. On the surface of it, if you don't know what Mariko Tamaki looks like, you look at that and you go, that is hilarious. What were they thinking? And then if you actually know what Mariko Tamaki is, it's hilarious on multiple levels. And you're like, oh my God, what are DC Comics thinking, allowing her to put this dumb-ass self-insert character into their superhero universe? No one thinks Mariko Tamaki is interesting enough to do that in the DC Comics universe. Superhero fans and kids that are fans of superheroes are not looking for stories about what it was like to be Mariko Tamaki. Like I said, there's a place for that on the bookstore shelves. There's a genre for that. And this ain't it. And that's why it got the backlash that it got. Bad timing, wrong cover, wrong time. People are fed up with this stuff, and it's just snowballing month after month after month. And right now, if this comic book was released today for the very first time, the criticism and the spotlight that it got and the negativity involved with it would be probably 10 times worse, because people are just fed up with this crap. They're fed up with writers who don't respect the universes, the genre, the fans. They don't respect the heroes, any of that stuff. Enough is enough. And I Am Not Starfire is just an example of that. The story itself isn't all that bad. It is very typical teenage coming of age story fare, the story itself, but the character is wholly unlikable, just a terrible person. I actually talked about it in depth with Joe Corallo. We sat down and talked about the hubbub going on about the comic book and where it really failed. Definitely check this out if you want more information on I Am Not Starfire and why this comic isn't very good.